climate emergency, ecological emergency theme. If you would like to know more about his sculptures and their meaning, please feel free to approach him after the talk, have a bit of a chat with him about that. We also have some flyers over there on the table. If you'd like to know more about Extinction Rebellion, you can feel free to take one or more flyers, and it's got our contact details on there. We've also got a pen and a paper over there if you'd like to leave your contact details and you'd like us to stay in touch with you after today. And a koha box as well if you'd like to leave a donation, which helps us do our work. Now, just getting on to our talk for today. The talk is going to be in a couple of parts. The first part is going to be about... the first part is going to be about the science, about the climate emergency, and also about the ecological consequences of that state of emergency. And the second part, we're going to be talking about what is it that we can do now we know all this information. It calls on us all to do something about it. Also, we have an acknowledgement that this conversation has been talked about now all around the world many, many times. And what we've found is people find it quite an intense, maybe heavy-going conversation, and you might feel some emotions come up. So we'll have a little bit of a brief session in our presentation today just about that. So it's very normal, it's very appropriate. If you feel something, that's okay, you're okay. The last part also will have a Q&A, a question and answer session, so please feel free to stay around at the end and we'll have a bit of more interactive discussion about what you've seen and heard. So also the skit that you saw us start out with, it will become clearer maybe later on in the presentation, the relevance of that skit to the action that we think we need to be taking. And so, without further ado, we might kick things off. We're going to kick things off with just a quick 30 seconds each. Going to invite you maybe to turn to your neighbour and just have a quick chat about what brought you here today. Just 30 seconds each, so a quick short minute, just to see why people came here today. Thank you, everyone. I hope you found something in common with your neighbours as to why you came here. And so now we will hand over the talk to our very good friend Christine to talk about the climate emergency science.
Okay. Thank you for coming here today, first of all. My name's Christine, part of the Extinction Rebellion here in Whangārei. And until recently, I was just quite happily getting on with my own life. But just in the face of mounting evidence about the ecological and climate crisis we're facing, it just became too uncomfortable for me to continue sitting on the fence. Can everyone hear me okay? Because
A little bit high would be good.
okay, thank you. How's that?
Yeah.
It's not my natural tone of voice,
A little
so
bit closer.
okay. So yeah, all right. Wow, this is very close to the audience. Okay, all right. So I'll just get into it. So the Earth is our only life support system, and we need to remember that there's no planet B. There's no alternative for us or our children and the future of our species. Everything that we need for survival is here, contained in the air, the biosphere, in the ocean, and the land that supports us. Next, please. We're in the process of destroying our life support system. And we're doing it in several ways. We're destroying our climate, we're heating up the earth, we no longer have the climate we've enjoyed for the last several thousand years. So the ecology, the biosphere, which is absolutely needed by us, is very damaged by our activities, which means that we're destroying our future. But we humans, because of our intelligence, we're the only species in 4 billion years on Earth that's ever understood its imminent extinction. So if any species can stop its own extinction, it's us. So let's look at climate. Greenhouse gases that keep the Earth warm. The Earth's atmosphere contains greenhouse gases which trap heat. The most important gases are carbon dioxide and methane. Now the levels of CO2, and I'm sure you all understand the greenhouse effect, but I'll just go through it. The levels of CO2 in our atmosphere regulate to a high level of precision the warmth of our climate. And while methane doesn't linger as long in the atmosphere as CO2, it creates a lot more instability with our climate. And those are probably some of the effects, when you watch the news, that we're starting to experience now. Next slide, please. But what's been happening is that we've been busily pumping greenhouse gases into the atmosphere at a completely unprecedented rate. So a bit of history, when we entered the Industrial Revolution and we discovered that there were vast underground reserves of fossil fuels, natural gas, oils, coals, these, carbon-based products. We exploited their energy to build our industrial civilization. But in the process of burning those fossil fuels for energy, we pumped a lot of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. So we've intensified the greenhouse effect, of course, and as we all know, the Earth is quite naturally getting hotter. So we can see here, see how stable it's been, when you look at the graph, just how stable our climate has been over the Holocene period. And then look here. Have you ever seen anything like that? I mean, seriously, we're in trouble. Look at this increase. Now this was in the last 230 years, but look here, the last 30 years. We're in a very dangerous experiment. Next one. Thank you. So, as you can see again, this is from the IPCC, Special Report, Climate Change and Land Use, Temperatures, and again, another graph from 1850 to 2018. And look again at the increase, you know. Sorry, just the same message, same thing happening. Land and sea. Next slide. Yes, the IPCC special report, you know, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Next slide, please, Ollie. And just reading their messages. Oh, sorry, could I just...
I'm sick.
No, that's no problem. Thanks, Ollie. So, you know, just to read the messages out, we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C. There's no room for new fossil fuels in a 1.5 degrees world. No room whatsoever. There's no time to lose in rapidly reducing emissions. So, the message is, it's urgent. The need for urgency. And it's serious, the cavalry. There's no cavalry coming. And just to let you know how urgent it is, when we think that the IPCC is not known for telling it as bad as it really is. It's quite a cautious and conservative body, and they're saying this. Hello. It's a worry. Oh, next slide, please. So, well, people who don't really pay much attention like to say, well, what's all the fuss about such a small temperature rise? But we've seen already, and we're seeing it more and more, how even a small change in an average temperature can produce a large change in extreme weather events and climate. Well, that's a worry, isn't it? Because it's not going to stay the same. As it's getting hotter. CO2 levels are increasing, and look at the wild weather that we're experiencing already. So again, more to worry about. Sorry. So yes, of course, you know, Earth has been around for a long, long time, much longer than we have. And over that period of time, you know, there was things got pretty hot, up and down, as you can see. And then here we are in the Holocene period. That's when, just that little period of time that we've been around, which enabled us to develop our agriculture and to build cities and to get ourselves in the mess that we're in right now, really, you know. So, we haven't, the point is really, we haven't seen 2 degrees for the last 13 million years. So, we don't know. We've never really lived on a warm Earth. We don't know what it's going to be like. Can we survive this? You know? Next slide. So it's not just the polar bears who are in trouble. Thank you. So basically, they're in trouble. That's happening, but what's causing that for the polar bears is trouble for us as well. A lot of trouble. Because as the reflective ice we know the ice is melting, as the reflective ice disappears, well, that's the ice that reflects the heat back up out of the atmosphere. But as that disappears, we get more dark ocean water. Now that's a heat sink. So, of course, as it gets hotter, more ice melts, then more dark ocean. So, again, more heat. And I think that's called an exponential effect. Yeah, just keeps getting worse and worse. So, over the last, since 1850, we've actually lost 15,000 cubic kilometres of Arctic ice over the last 45 years, sorry. So that's a huge amount, you know. And who knows how much we're losing right now. How much is disappearing right now. Next slide, please. So the melting of land means, there's a sea level rise as well. And that's another thing to be concerned about, Here in Whangārei, we're quite vulnerable. But people are vulnerable everywhere. So as of 2018, the sea level rise is 30 to 20 centimetres higher on average than it was in 1900. That's a pretty big change compared to the previous 2,000 years when really it didn't rise much at all. So I could talk about what that means for us or for our Pacific neighbours, but I'll leave it. Except just to say that it's going to affect our biodiversity here. It's going to affect our taonga species, our coastal communities, marae, urupa, all that. People who have been trying to tell us, people in the Pacific Islands, Indigenous people, have been trying to tell us the same message for decades, or maybe centuries. And it's only now that we're in trouble that we are starting to listen to them. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide, please. Yes, so that was only half of the problem. So now I will leave you with Matt, and he will the other part.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks, Christine, for telling us about the climate crisis part of the problem. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name's Matt. I'm a caregiver, and I live here in Whangārei. I'm going to tell you about the other part of the problem in a moment. Firstly, let's address denial. The collective denial of non-Indigenous societies. The dominant governing societies of Earth have ignored both Indigenous peoples' warnings about ecological collapse and more recently the science of the past 40 years or so. And this trickles down to us as individuals. We're all informed citizens. We watch the news, we read articles. We know there's a problem. But we've built a wall between our knowledge and our actions. Even if we recycle, do beach cleanups, other good things on that level, we still have this disconnection to the truth, the scale of the problem. I mean, this might be controversial to say, but there's a fireworks shop out there. I mean, how is that still a thing, right? Denial. The way we can deal with denial is to confront the truth honestly, as you've been doing about the climate crisis. And that is an emotional process. Let's continue now, mindful of that process and our responses as we discuss the biosphere. Slide, please, Ollie. So this is the other problem, the other part of the problem. The ecology, the shell of living things that sustains us, is under threat from our activities. Slide, please. These living things, these webs of life, are partly on the land and partly in the oceans. And we're managing to destroy both those ecosystems with our industrialisation. Slide, please. High-intensity agriculture has replaced wilderness with land used to grow enough food to support 7.5 billion humans. It's predicted that we will be 10 billion by the year 2050. In order to feed ourselves, we've deforested 2.3 million acres globally since the year 2000. In the Amazon alone, 136 million acres has been cleared globally. Sorry, I've read the wrong line. Just for animal agriculture. In fact, much of our agriculture produces meat, which consumes much more land than crops do. The UN estimates 14.5% of human carbon emissions comes from meat and dairy farming, and we've replaced the forests that normally maintain a microclimate with crops which have really a different kind of microclimate, one that's not nearly as moist. We have eradicated pests to protect these crops, and in the next few decades, our pesticides could wipe out 40% of the world's insect life, including those we rely upon to pollinate our food crops. Slide. Our land use affects global food security, which is already being severely impacted by extremes in temperatures, by droughts, excessive rains, and flooding. Globally, the number of undernourished people had been dropping. It actually got down to below 800 million. But since 2015, that number has started to rise again. What happens to society when food prices spike? Almost always, we see that food insecurity leads to internal displacement and armed conflict. Imagine that on a global scale in a world with nuclear weapons. Slide, please. Forests are also intense carbon sinks. How that works? Plants grow rapidly, pull carbon out of the air and turn it into plant material. When a plant dies, it forms soil, locking up much of that carbon. And that's not all, because these trees are respiring. They metabolize water and release it, maintaining a moist climate. So rainforests draw down a lot of carbon, they produce a lot of oxygen and moisture, maintaining an abundance of life. Burning those forests unlocks that carbon and releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. When we replace forests with crops, we remove this biodiverse system with a monoculture. So we replace it with a monoculture, which is very poor in its diversity, its carbon drawdown and moisture production. Slide please, Ollie. This process, if it's not managed carefully, turns forest land into desert, which has very low ability to sustain life. It's very difficult to reverse that process because you've lost all of the moisture from that region. Next slide, please. We sometimes forget that oceans are equally important to our survival. Slide. Oceans, much more than forests, are the lungs of the earth. They produce between 50 to 80% of the Earth's oxygen and consume more than a quarter of the planet's carbon dioxide. But this is reliant on a thriving marine ecosystem. Photosynthesizing organisms like phytoplankton pull carbon out from the air, lock it up in the oceans, producing oxygen in return. These creatures support marine life, which billions of humans rely upon for their primary source of nutrition. Ocean acidification is threatening this system. It's known as the evil twin of global warming. Ocean acidification has already increased by 30% and is set to increase to 150% by the year 2100. Slide, please. Well, so far we've talked about things we may all know about, read about and watch on TV. This slide is about something that is less well known: abrupt climate change. This was addressed in a 2018 paper by the National Academy of Sciences in the US. They studied the possibility of changes happening very quickly, becoming essentially irreversible due to runaway effects. I'm basically describing a feedback loop. The study points out that the Earth, our Earth, has never known a semi-stable climate at around 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So there is a substantial risk that temperatures will keep rising due to feedback loops until the climate reaches some new equilibrium. With 2 degrees Celsius of warming, 99% of tropical coral reefs will disappear. That means an entire component of the Earth's biosphere would be eliminated. 25% of all marine life depend on coral reefs. 50% of the Great Barrier Reef is already dead. For the boreal forests, we have just had the worst wildfire season on record in Alaska, Siberia and Greenland. These were not in the main fires lit by people, but fires lit by lightning. The CO2 released from forest fires last June matched Sweden's carbon emissions for an entire year. And of course, right now, there are record-breaking wildfires across Southern California. The IPCC report on oceans and the cryosphere, released 25th September this year, says that the Arctic near-surface permafrost faces, quote, widespread disappearance, with a 30 to 99% decrease in area of if emissions are very high, releasing tens, possibly hundreds of billions of tonnes of methane and other greenhouse gases. Slide please. We've already mentioned ocean acidification, its effects on marine life, which is under multiple pressures and could collapse. The increasing acidity caused by carbon dioxide dissolving into oceans is causing scarcity of the building blocks that some creatures need to build and maintain their shells. Estimates of future carbon dioxide levels based on business as usual emissions indicate that by the end of this century, the surface waters of the ocean could reach acidity levels nearly 150% higher than today, resulting in a pH level that the oceans haven't experienced for more than 20 million years. Pollution. The burning of fossil fuels drives climate crisis, but of course we all know the air pollution it causes also gives us major health issues. In the ocean, pesticide and fertilizer runoff are creating huge dead zones, which are oxygen depleted areas they're extremely hostile to many marine species. The world's largest dead zone, located in the Gulf of Mexico, is almost 23,000 square kilometres, roughly the size of Israel. The current global count is about 400 dead zones. Soil erosion. New Zealand loses its soil 10 times faster than the rest of the world, and that's due to our land management practices. Forest clearance and overstocking on steep terrain. And deforestation and habitat loss are also massive blows to both wildlife and to our planet's ability to regulate its temperature. Slide please, Ollie. And so to the issue of extinction. There are 5 mass extinctions scientists can see in the geological record. The last one that killed the dinosaurs was caused, at least partly, by an asteroid strike. The other 4 were caused by rapid increases in atmospheric CO2, triggered, for example, by huge volcanic eruptions, which in turn set peat and coal seams alight. The most devastating extinction event to date was the Permian Triassic extinction, in which 97% of all life was lost due to runaway feedback loop events that led to the gassing of our planet. The level of CO2 emissions at that time were at a level that we are currently heading for today. But the rate of our emissions increases actually mirror those of the explosive asteroid. Slide, please. So this slide shows scientists releasing and igniting methane gas that is leaching out of permafrost. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, CO2 persists in the atmosphere for centuries or even millennia. Methane lasts a decade or two, but heats the planet 86 times more than CO2. And then methane decays and it turns into CO2. Research in the journal Nature indicates that for each degree that the Earth's temperature rises, the amount of methane entering the atmosphere from microorganisms dwelling in lake sediment and freshwater wetlands will increase several times. As temperatures rise, the relative increase of methane emissions will outpace that of carbon dioxide from these sources. We know that if we carry on along our business as usual path, that human extinction is a distinct possibility. Slide. We've begun what's sometimes called the sixth mass extinction of life on Earth. It was recently reported by the UN that we threaten up to 1 million species with extinction. Since 1970, we've lost 60% of all wildlife. On the 6th of May this year, a global assessment report on biodiversity and ecosystem services was released. So 1 million species are at risk of extinction, it's reported. It also reported the causes of deforestation, overfishing, hunting, poaching, pollution, invasion by exotic species, and climate crisis. Slide. The recent Environment Aotearoa report has shown the world how bad we are at caring for our home. But it should be acknowledged for telling the truth. We have the highest proportion of threatened indigenous species in the world. This includes 90% of all our seabirds, 84% of our reptiles, 76% of our freshwater fish, and 74% of our terrestrial birds, all threatened with extinction. Slide, please. Well, that's the end of the intense and scary science part. Thank you for facing the truth about our ecological crisis. I find it very moving, and I'm sure you do too. Sorry. I'm not sure if this if the cheesy layout of this slide will comfort you, but I think the words of climate scientist Dr. Kate Marvel of NASA's Goddard Institute has something to offer us. Hopefully I can get through this. She says, the opposite of hope is despair, is not despair, it is grief. Even while resolving to limit the damage, we can mourn. And here, the sheer scale of the problem provides a perverse comfort. We're all in this together. The swiftness of the change, its scale and inevitability, binds us into one. We need courage, not hope. Grief, after all, is the cost of being alive. We're all fated to live lives shot through with sadness, and are not worth less for it. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. Next slide, please, Ollie. We're just going to have a minute of silent reflection. Ollie, can you give me a cue? After that, we're going to have a couple of minutes where you can talk to each other about what you've heard. I'll stop you on 2 minutes. And then Jeff is going to come up and tell us what we can actually do about this. Thank you. Please pause for 1 minute. Thank you. Please turn to your neighbour and for 2 minutes discuss what you've heard today, if you feel so moved.
known amongst decision makers like World War I, situations like so I'm started policy work I negotiations with the government and labour members, and I was it's just really tough knowing about this. I'm aware there's several campaigns going on. Like Smith's,